Good evening. Truth. Do people want the truth, or do people think that they have the truth and there is no other truth other than what they think? I was visiting my mother-in-law in Massachusetts and stayed in a hotel. I couldn't help but looking at a um, television station, see what they talked about, and saw that there was a channel that talked of political commentary, and they were worried about the installment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the new secretary of HHS. And what was their problem? The problem was that Robert F. Kennedy believes in science, but not in scientists. And they were discussing that as if, how could you not believe in the scientists if you believe in the science? And the answer is because if the scientists have an agenda that they wish to impose on other people, and that agenda enriches them, then they change the scientific facts. That's the reality. I'll give you an example for those who are willing to hear. 4 years ago, approximately, when COVID was raging, and it was suggested by Donald Trump that a way of treating COVID was through hydroxychloroquine, because several doctors, including a very heroic doctor called Dr. Zelenko, had discovered that by prescribing hydroxychloroquine with zinc, he had almost 100% cure rate. And that was remarkable. And immediately, as soon as it was suggested that hydroxychloroquine, which cost pennies as a dose, studies came out that hydroxychloroquine was dangerous for one's heart. Yours truly put a video up. The video had 5,000 hits or 6,000 hits within 48 hours. And it was taking off, so much so that it would have had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hits within several weeks. As soon as it reached a level of it was going to explode, my boss, the one over me, called me that somebody demanded that he get Bergstein to take that video off. What was the video about? The video was about hydroxychloroquine. You see, I have atrial fibrillation, and I am a candidate that without certain medicines I can have a stroke or a heart attack. So I asked my doctor, my cardiologist, is hydroxychloroquine safe for me? This was before any of these studies came out. And he said, what? I've been in the business for 40 years. I have dozens of patients, African Americans, that have lupus, and they take hydroxychloroquine on a daily basis and never had a problem. Never in 40 years had a problem. And I said that in the video. And I was forced to shut it down. Now, for those of you out there, I'm just a rabbi in Farmington Hills, Michigan. What are they afraid of? The answer is because I'm believable. I was telling the truth. But nobody who has a vested interest in the drug companies or in a certain political party that receives from those drug companies, nobody's interested in the truth. They're interested in telling you what the science says, but the science doesn't say that. Oh, they had studies. Yes, they had studies on hydroxychloroquine. They gave people 4 times the recommended dose of hydroxychloroquine, and people would have heart palpitations and would have cardiac events. Of course, if I took 4 cups of coffee, my heart would start racing, pumping so fast that I could possibly have a heart attack. Or if I had 8 cups of coffee. 4 times my usual amount. I take 2 cups of coffee in the morning. Sometimes, so if I took 4 times as much, my heart would race very, very fast, and I might be a candidate for a heart attack. You give a person 4 times the dose of hydroxychloroquine, and they also did not include zinc in the process. It was necessary to have hydroxychloroquine and zinc in order to cure the person from the COVID. This was supposed to be science. So to those commentators, I don't remember their names, I wasn't interested. It isn't science. It's pseudoscience. It's quack science. They want you to think that this is scientific. And all the evidence that shows to the contrary, they cover up because they have a vested interest in what the science should say so that people will follow like sheep and make them wealthy. And that's what RFK objected to. And that's why RFK has been appointed. And hopefully he'll do something about it so that people will not die because of disinformation. Hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, quercetin, these are things that are very cheap and could have helped people be saved from COVID. Instead, millions of Americans died for no reason because people were trying to enrich themselves. And I know that this sounds harsh and cruel, but I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you what happened to me. I was forced to take down a video that could have given this information to people. Give you other examples of that. There are people who claim to be great historians, and they claim that the book of Genesis was written by different authors, and they give examples of, how this could not have been from God. One of the examples is in this week's Torah portion, that Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, came with 10 camels to Haran from Hebron. And what do the Bible critics say? That this could not have happened in the time of Abraham, because only 300 years later were camels domesticated. And therefore, this is an anachronism. This was written much later, maybe the 7th century before the Common Era, imagining that these things happened 1400 years before, 1400 years before the Common Era, 1500 years before the Common Era. Abraham preceded the Exodus by 400 years, so that puts it approximately about 1700 before the Common Era. And at that point, 1800 years before the Common Era, there was no camels that were domesticated. That's what they tell you. That's a lie. What they told you in college, what they have in the books of the so-called Bible scholars is a lie. It's not true. There have been discoveries in a city called getting old and forgetting the name of the city. But they discovered old tablets from a city that was existent in the time, Sumer, it existed in the time of Abraham, and those clay tablets have transactions of selling goods to other people. They have wheat, they have wool, they have sheep, goats. They also have transactions for camels. And these clay tablets from Sumer are from a city that was destroyed 1700 years before the Common Era. In other words, it was contemporaneous with Abraham, and they were selling camels. They were selling camels in Mesopotamia. They were domesticated in Mesopotamia. So the question is, why do these scholars make this mistake? The answer is very simple. Other cities did not have tablets that say they sold camels. Only one city, so far from what they've discovered of that time, was selling camels. What does that tell you? If it's only existent in one market out of 100, it means that camels were very rare. Since camels were very rare, they must have been very, very expensive. And since they were very expensive, anybody who had a camel must have been really rich. So imagine you're some shepherd, some poor shepherd, living in a shepherd community, and somebody comes along with 10 camels. What would you do? You'd probably run to see it, because this was astounding. You never saw a camel, and 10 camels was like seeing the equivalent of 10 extended luxury limousines. You know, those luxury limousines that are 60 feet long, 3 times the length of an average car, and they can even have a swimming pool in it. That's what a camel was, a luxury limousine. 10 camels was 10 luxury limousines. And you would run to see it. And guess what the Torah says? As soon as Lavan heard that there were 10 camels with a man, he ran. He wanted to see this rich guy. He wanted to see how he could steal money from him. It's exactly what the Torah says, because it was something rare. And so the people who were telling you that there were no camels were lying to you. And the story is understood better because of the question of how abundant, how prevalent was the ownership of camels. There are many other such examples in biblical history, in the sciences, and what scientists communicate to you. Science depends upon the scientist, the veracity, the honesty of the scientist. When as a student of 17, 18, I believed in my professors. I believed that anyone who was an older scholar would never tell me something false, especially if I could verify it. You can verify certain things by experiment. You can verify things in physics. You can verify those things by experiment. You can verify things in chemistry by experiment. There is no way by experiment to verifying things like history or things that you can't see. There's no way for me without a massive laboratory to verify the results of the so-called scientists, the National Institute of Health, run by Fauci. There's no way for us, simple people. We are either supposed to believe these people or not. And if these people have a vested interest in a particular perspective, we have to be suspicious. Oh, you're questioning the honesty of a scientist? Yeah, I'm questioning the honesty of a scientist because that scientist could be promoting pseudoscience for you because he has a vested interest in that particular perspective. One of my colleagues, friend who I met in Boston many years ago, Dr. Yaakov Brower, came here in Detroit 25, 30 years ago, gave a lecture. 40, 50 years ago, people believed that the enamel in your teeth, which are one of the hardest things, one of the hardest materials in the world, are all hexagons, are based on hexagon crystals, because hexagon crystals are found to be among the most sturdy and most solid things in the world. Diamonds, the diamond crystal is a hexagon. And so people assumed that in order for the enamel in your teeth to be so strong that it can literally cut through iron. I mean, not that you could chew iron, but that the teeth, you took a tooth out of a person's mouth, you could actually scratch iron with it. The only way that you could have something so hard as enamel in your teeth is if the enamel was a hexagon molecule. And people wrote PhDs. Maybe 100 people, 100 PhDs were based upon this assumption that the enamel was a hexagon molecule. Along came somebody in the early 70s and postulated that it wasn't really a hexagon molecule. It was really a cube. Not a cube, but four-cornered, like you would call it, forgot what it was called. Not a, it was a four-cornered molecule. It was like a square or rectangular. And that's really what it looks like, is it's rectangular. And he presented his findings. He couldn't get anybody to publish it because the bias in the academia was such. People had put their entire career based on the assumption that it was hexagonal. And he showed that it was really four-cornered. It was not a hexagon. And that this changed the whole idea of what enamel was like. He couldn't get it published for almost 2 years. Because there was a bias against that opinion. It wasn't a true bias, it was a personal bias. Scientists are not above personal biases. Scientists can be bought or can be influenced by money. You cannot get a position or even become a candidate for doctoral, for getting any kind of doctorate in biology if you don't believe in evolution. If you don't believe in evolution as it is presented by the present scientist, the present biologist, you cannot become a student in their institutions. There's ample doubt that a person can have on evolution, and I'm one of those doubters, and I absolutely say that evolution is a hoax. It's the biggest hoax that's been ever promoted in the field of science, as science. There is absolutely no evidence that we came from an ape. They've got in-betweens, all these in-betweens. And I have a very big question for you. If we came from a tweener, why did all the tweeners die? Why are there no chimpanzees or gorillas exhibiting humanoid feelings, humanoid tendencies, hominid tendencies? Why are there none? Not a single one. There are millions of chimpanzees and apes in Africa and South America. There are places that are completely isolated, such as in Mozambique, Madagascar. Completely isolated from the rest of the world. Why are there none that have developed? All over the world, there are millions of species. The species don't change into something else. Why are there no in-betweens? Why are there no lizards becoming birds or becoming feathery? Lizards are supposed to have developed feathers and become birds. Not a single lizard has developed a single feather in all the years that they've said this. I recall meeting a man who was one of the greatest scholars in the field of statistics. So people will say, but you can deal with statistics and manipulate them as you wish. His name was Professor Avram Michael Hasofer, professor of statistics in the University of New South Wales in Australia, Sydney, Australia. And it was his job, together with American scientists, to determine whether there was going to be mutations that will cause large and dangerous creatures to overcome this world, take over the world. We had these visions of an army of ants the size of human beings taking over the world. You had Godzilla and all these, the creature that came from beneath the sea. Frightened us when we were children in the 50s. Because people were afraid that the result of nuclear explosions were going to change the biology of the world forever. So American and Australian scientists, they checked out the South Pacific to see what exactly was happening there. And they found millions of mutations, millions of them. Guess how many species, new species, as a result of these millions of mutations they found? That's right, 0. Not a single new species came from millions of mutations. Not 1 or 2 or 3, millions of them. They found not one new species. It was Professor Hasofer's responsibility to take all of the data and make sense out of it. And he basically said that given what we have discovered, the nuclear tests will not cause any new mutations of creating new species that we should be afraid of. Because no new species were found, no new species would happen in the future as a result. So then he decided to take his calculations and go backwards. Go backwards billions of years to see whether there was a possibility that the mutations that are supposed to be the cause of evolution, of macroevolution, is this possible? And his conclusion was, given billions of years, and given all of the possibilities of these changes, it is mathematically impossible for evolution, as we understand it, to have taken place. I repeat, he said it was mathematically impossible for evolution to have taken place. So what did the scientists do to discredit Professor Hasofer? Did they discover new evidence? No, they discovered no new evidence. Did they find a flaw in his logic? No, they found no flaws in his logic. They just completely ignored his findings. One of the most important bases for cosmology, as we know it, is radioisotopic dating. Radioisotopic dating is supposed to be the pinnacle of assessment of how old certain things are. For example, carbon-14. Carbon-14 is a half-life, I don't know, 2,400 years, I forgot, 3,200 years, whatever it is. It has a half-life that's very predictable. And when you discover that carbon-14 exists in the outside world because of cosmic ray bombardment. You have a certain amount of carbon-14 within yourself, because a certain percentage of carbon molecules, the carbon atoms, come in, are bombarded by cosmic rays and become carbon-14. Carbon by nature is carbon-12. 6 protons and 6 neutrons compose the number 6 element, which is carbon, which is absolutely necessary for all existence, for all biological existence. We are all some forms of carbohydrates, primarily. And so our system is based on carbon. Biological system. Biochemistry is based on carbon. We have a lot of carbon. That's what makes us alive. So there'll be a certain percentage of carbon-14 that will be absorbed in our system. After something is buried in the ground, a grave, or covered up by mud, at a certain point, I think it's 1600 years or so, I just don't remember the half-life of carbon-14. I used to know it. Well, let's assume it was about 1600. Maybe that's radium. I forgot, but let's take 1600 years. So if you have something that's has half the carbon-14 molecules in it, carbon-14, by the way, is radioactive, and it will emit the additional 2 neutrons that aren't necessary for it to exist as carbon. So in the course of 1600 years, let's say, half of the carbon-14 will have gone on a diet and become again carbon-12. So if you have an existence that only has half the number of carbon-14, we know it's about 1600 years been in the ground. If it has a quarter, it's 3200, and so on and so forth. That's how they date things. Lubavitcher Rebbe, in one of his writings, theorizes, postulates, that at the time of creation, things were hotter, and there was a lot more pressure, not just in the atmosphere, but all around us, all around the earth. So there was greater temperatures and pressures, and a lot more chemicals that were catalysts, cause various kinds of reactions. And the presence of greater temperature, pressure, and catalysts, the radioactive deterioration of radioisotopes would change. That's what the Rebbe suggested to a scientist. And when I read this, I thought this was nonsense. This was 1964 when I read it. I was not a Lubavitcher then. I became a Lubavitcher not because of the Rebbe's letter, but because of other things. I believed in the Rebbe's ideology. I thought the ideology was right. But this statement that under different temperatures, pressures, and catalysts, radioisotopic decay would change, I thought was nonsense. Because temperature is the movement, the rapid movement of molecules in a certain closed area. Pressures is the number of molecules in a certain area, how they interact with each other. The more molecules in a particular area, the more pressure there's going to be. Catalysts enhance chemical reactions. I never saw a catalyst, as a student of science, never saw that a catalyst caused an atomic reaction. All of this pressure and temperature are all external to the molecule. They don't affect the nucleus. The nucleus is so tiny that if the nucleus was the size of a basketball, the size of what I'm holding my hands up to you now, if this was an atom, you still couldn't see the nucleus. The nucleus could only be seen through a microscope. So the temperature which is moving the basketball into each other has got nothing to do with the nucleus. How could it cause any kind of deterioration in the nucleus. I thought it was nonsense. 1971, I'm walking the streets, or 70 or 71, I'm walking the streets. A friend of mine tells us this is March of 70 or 71. New York Times, second section, first page. Group of Stanford meaning the ones in California, one of the major universities in the country, declare that under different temperatures, pressures, and catalysts, radioisotopic deterioration changes. The Rebbe said this in 1962, this is coming out in 1971, 9 years later. They mentioned temperature, pressure, and catalysts, just like the Rebbe said. It was like the Rebbe was saying prophecy in 1962. Well, it's been over 52 years since then, 53 years now. What did they do with that study? They ignored it. You don't see it at all. You can't even find it. I tried finding it recently, looking for it, both in Stanford and looking through the archives of the New York Times. Can't even find it. That's what happened. Something that does not follow the orthodoxy and the vested interests of scientists, they ignore. The fact that in Sumer they found camels is ignored by the biblical critics, even today. Even today, you'll get magazine articles or articles written on the internet how the Bible is just a bunch of stories, and the story of Eliezer at the well, which is this week's Torah portion, by the way, is an anachronism. It couldn't have happened then. And it did happen because camels existed. They were just very rare. That's why Lavan runs to see Eliezer. And just as the social scientists, the biblical critics, were wrong and still don't admit that they're wrong, so too the biologists who believe in evolution, cosmologists who believe in the inviolability of radioisotopic dating, all that which you consider to be science just isn't true. Only those things that can be verified by experiment, and verified by experiment in today's conditions, can you accept as true. But if you don't know the conditions of past existences, you can't say very much about them because you don't know the conditions. There are variables that could change everything. And therefore, getting back to the point that I saw on this television station, if you believe in science, it has to be true. How could you doubt it? If Fauci's got stocks in Pfizer, or that he's going to get a few $1 million or a few tens of $1 millions as a result of his promotion of remdesivir, which absolutely did not work. Failure forced people to use it, $3,000 at a shot. How much they made off of that, who knows? God knows. And all those people who were discouraged from using hydroxychloroquine, that was a falsehood, that was a lie. It was a lie. And all those studies that you saw, based on lies. And yours truly, who had the information from the cardiologist, I was forced off the internet. I was forced off my YouTube channel from telling the truth. Because, as Dennis Prager says, the left doesn't care about truth. It cares about its agenda. So when you hear things like science and truth, don't listen. You have to have an open mind that maybe there's a different opinion. Unfortunately, the universities are not a place where you can have differences of opinion, where opinions can be talked out, opinions can be argued out. I don't know enough to know whether global warming is truly dependent upon man or other factors, or whether man's influence is partially to blame or only marginally to blame. I do know that the global warming issue, punishes successful nations and rewards nations that basically are nothing, who basically, because they have nothing, no industry, will suddenly are supposed to reap benefit from the carbon footprint that we supposedly make. In the process, though, the president-elect pointed out that the greatest nations who cause pollution, China and India, don't have to pay very much. Oh, because they're emerging. No, that doesn't work. They're the biggest polluters. The agreement was against the United States. The agreement was to limit the United States and to bankrupt the United States. At any rate, I'm not smart enough to know whether global warming is a reality based on man-made, that it's man-made. I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that there were other times when we thought that we were going to have an ice age. That was too long ago. Also know that we had tremendous warm-ups in times in the past that were not dependent on the industry. Before the ice age, the northern part, the northern and southern hemisphere, the poles were tropical. In, I think, one of the most northernmost island in the Arctic, off of Siberia, has tens of thousands of skeletons of tropical animals like rhinoceros, hippopotamus, so on. What are they doing there? The answer is they lived there. How did they get there? It's cold. The answer is it was tropical at the time. The world has changed a lot. The world was much warmer at one time, and then it got cold. The world goes through changes from warmth to cold, back to warmth. And it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with man-made manufacture of CO2. Maybe today there is somewhat of it, but we've had tremendous climate changes that have happened without the human being. And guess what? The world has survived. And the world will survive. What people tell you is science may not be real science. Rather, it's a perspective from which they can make a lot of money. Al Gore made a lot of money with his Inconvenient Truth, with his movie. Al Gore became a billionaire as a result of his position. So how do you know that his position is true? One of the actual fathers, Al Gore claimed at one point that he created the internet. One of my friends who lives in Detroit, very, very, very humble individual, great computer scientist, was one of those who actually did create the internet. And I asked him, you created the internet. Why didn't you patent it? They didn't think in those terms in those days. They thought in terms of what they could create for everybody, for the benefit of everybody. So that he never actually never benefited from his innovations. Mr. Lerner is a fine man, great computer analyst and scientist, a very poor businessman. Could have been might have been a trillionaire as a result. But he truly gave the world the internet. He's one of the fathers of the internet. Not Al Gore, but Al Gore made a lot of money on information that may or may not be true. So please, what is the truth? The truth is only that which can be verified. And there are things that we can verify about the Torah and things that we still can't verify. But that doesn't mean that the scientists have the truth, because quite often they don't promote the truth.